Welcome to the Rising Seas discussion of Paradise Lost. We're going to go around the table to introduce our names and get started.
Ms. Chevalier.
Mr. Gatti.
Mr. Henderson.
Ms. Chefalas.
Mr. Moore.
Ms. Sanchez.
Mr. VanGessel.
Ms. Chevalier, if you'd like to start with our first OQ.
Cool. So my OQ is what in the text may clue us in to why Adam was tempted. So I picked up a few lines in book 9, around 996, 999, and 1000. And a few words I picked up that would relate to this, like kind of clue us in, were enticing fruit, female charm, Adam took no thought. And I was like focused on these like three, especially female charm, because what does that entail? Necessarily, it could be a plethora of different things. So, going off of that.
Could you just remind us what line number you're on?
Yeah, for female charm, it's 999 in book 9.
Yeah, it is interesting to try and figure out what Milton means by female charm, because we know after Adam ate the fruit, he was more lustful towards Eve. Like they had relations after they ate the fall, where Adam said that Eve looked like she never had before. So I think this female charm must have been slightly more innocent than that. But it's also interesting that it says that Adam, against his better knowledge, not deceived, sinned. So yeah, he definitely he sinned because he wanted to be with Eve for better or worse. And I think he knew that he was doing possibly committing a sin.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if like he was tempted by like the female charm of her looks, or like maybe it's referring to sex, something like that. Yeah.
I thought, well, when I read it, I don't know if I take it as like lustful, because in the page before, around line 965, around there it says, it's saying, "Are gladly of our union, one heart, one soul." And then above that it says, "Death to me as..." I'm sorry, no, not there. "Our state cannot be served. We are one flesh. To lose thee were to lose myself." So I kind of took it more as like a romantic thing, that like they love each other rather than just like a lustful temptation.
Just real quickly, to go off of what Mr. Henderson said and what Ms. Sanchez just said, I think instead of being like the looks and sex, it could be female charm meaning love. In that it's just the difference between having eaten the fruit. It was sort of there beforehand, but the awareness of female charm now has just shifted, so that instead of the innocent and pure love that they used to share, it's that same thing, just now tainted with evil and knowledge, I think.
Right.
Yeah. I agree with Mr. Moore. He definitely knows that what he's like losing by choosing to be with her. And on line 1165, he says, "Who might have lived and enjoyed immortal bliss, yet willingly chose rather death with thee." Like he knows that he could have like stayed in this paradise and been immortal, but he chose to be with her, and I think that's out of pure love. Instead of just, wouldn't choose to leave that kind of paradise just for looks, I think.
Yeah.
And previously in this book, they kind of reference like the nuptials almost is kind of what they're approaching it as. These two are now in some union, so Eve and Adam would do things together as a couple almost, which would support why he did it, even though he knew it was wrong. They had to do it together.
Yeah, I definitely agree with like all you guys that it's not lustful. It's primarily the love that he has for her, but also I think that when we're talking about the female charm, that I'm talking about line was, but finally you'll become a female charm. I mainly think that her argument is she's being very persuasive and persuading him into eating the fruit, similarly to how Satan tempted her. So it's also kind of how she's tempting him and how she is persuading him into eating the fruit. That's tempts him. Yeah.
Going off of that, I agree. I actually noted on line 1030. 1036.
Yeah.
Of Eve whose eyes darted contagious fire, and that actually reminded me of Satan, because they describe Satan with like fire and all that. So I thought it's interesting that they described her with those like characteristics.
So
Sorry, unless anyone has something pressing to say, I think we're ready to move on to our second OQ.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so my OQ is mainly how does Paradise Lost illuminate the love between Adam and Eve that we don't really see a lot of in Genesis 3, particularly in Book 9, and how is their love for each other similar? How is it different? How does their love for each other change throughout that book, particularly like after the fall?
Well, just generally, I'd say that you get a lot more. You get to see a lot more of their relationship just because you do have dialogue between the two. You get to see what they're thinking a little bit. So just inherently, you're going to get a little bit more view of their relationship.
Good.
Well, I think it changed in the sense that before it was a very like it was like an innocent love, like they were happy, and then towards the end of book 9, then it became more selfish, and that's when Eve started thinking like, oh, maybe I shouldn't even tell Adam about it, and maybe I'll be more superior, more equal to him. So I think it was more of like a selfish love.
Yeah, for me, I guess the change, it seems like throughout the entire book and even after the fall, they both love each other. Like they firmly love each other, but how they choose to love each other changes. And it like I think selfish is the best word to describe it. How like they're really interested in like what they can get out of the relationship, and that's when she's faced with the choice to choose between telling Adam or not about the fruit. She's really thinking about her best interest and like whether or not if she doesn't eat the fruit, then if she doesn't tell Adam, then she'll have that superiority over him. But if she does, then she'll stick with him, whether or not they are together in death or in flourishing if they don't die.
I think it's really interesting because in Genesis 3, there's no real mention of the selfishness or the lust. So it's really just Milton's depiction of how he, I guess, envisions Adam and Eve after they eat the fruit. And like you said, lustfulness and selfishness are two of the best words that describe this whole encounter. At the top of page 235, line around 10, 12, carnal desire inflaming he on Eve began to cast lascivious eyes, she him, as wantonly repaid in lust they burn. I think that's one of the best little snippets that really shows how they do feel about each other. And it's just showing how the human characteristics that we have in today's world really started with Adam and Eve.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
I think one thing that shows that they had a more meaningful love than just a physical attraction before the fall is when Adam was thinking, should God create another Eve and I another rib of cord, yet loss of thee would never from my heart no I feel. So he did not just want any woman, but he had a meaningful attraction to Eve that went beyond just physical looks.
Yeah, and I think too you can see. I'm going off what Mr. Moore was saying. I was thinking with like the lust, it's super passion driven. After they have the fruit, they both have it. You can tell that like once Eve has had the fruit, like something has changed about her, and like she's more driven towards Adam. And then when they both have it, Adam, when he's talking like from like lines like 10, 12, like down the entire page of 235, like he like wants to have sex with her, and he's like super driven by this passion. Like it's just like something completely changed, and it's more than just like a loving and intimate relationship. It's like now it's almost like they're like intoxicated with like this idea of like passion and being driven by it.
We have about a minute left for this.
Okay. Just like a side note about your comment, Mr. Moore, I think Milton kind of sets up sex and having sex as kind of a sin by making it the first thing that they do after they eat the fruit. And that's when sin enters the world, and that's the first thing that they do. So Milton kind of sets that up as sinful, lust is sinful, and that's something that's not in Genesis.
Yeah, I agree because like when they have sex the first time, it's after like their nuptials and whatever, and it's still like an innocent thing. But then after, they're saying that their innocence is gone. Like their innocence was their veil of darkness, they refer to it as. So it's kind of weird that even though they're doing the same thing they were doing before, it's just because the innocence isn't there anymore, it's like completely different.
I think it's really interesting to see how Milton kind of plays off the Catholic vision of how sinful premarital sex is in today's world and how that kind of reflected in his writing. Third OQ?
I wanted to ask, what are the possible reasons why Satan's punishment in the fallen angels was more severe than Adam and Eve? Satan and the fallen angels, they were sent to eternal damnation in hell, whereas Adam and Eve, they were punished, but their punishment was not damnation, it was not eternal damnation, they just had slightly less severe punishment. So I was wondering what possible reasons for that, were the angels superior to man? And also I was curious to know, how was the sin of Satan similar to that of Adam and Eve, or their motivations for sin?
Definitely something, like when you first said that question, I would think of as innocence. Like, I feel like, Satan, like, he wasn't innocent. Like, when he was in heaven, like, he was doing what he was doing to kind of, like, hurt God. Like, that's, like, kind of what I took from it. And, like, in this sense, like, Adam and Eve, like, they kind of knew, but they were so innocent, and they didn't, like, have this intent to be hurtful, or at least I didn't get that from the text, but.
Leading up to Eve sinning, you see her kind of like very like similarities to Satan. Like, she begins to question God. She says on line 758, like, he's forbidding us of this knowledge of good, like, why would you do that? And then she also is power hungry, which Satan also was, so you kind of see that similarity. So I think that the punishments are similar but not the same, because Satan was like God's right-hand man. Like, he was held definitely higher than humans were. So I think their punishments are similar because they had similar faults, but it's different because they were different extremes.
And I do think that angels, superior is not the right word, but they did hold like a higher standard than the humans. And I think, like Chevalier had mentioned, that Satan's act was directly against God, and it was sort of uninfluenced, and it was his own thinking, I want to be better than God. Whereas with humans, Eve was tempted by Satan. Satan wasn't really tempted by anything else besides his own desire. And so I think it's somewhat unfair to put them on the same playing field, because the angels were already a step higher than humans.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. And like the angels were superior to people. I mean, Satan mentions that when he's going through. He sees Adam and Eve, and he says that he sees how much God loves them, and but even make sure to point out that they're close to like the greatness of angels, but they're not quite angels. So there is kind of that difference. I guess because of that greatness, they are held to a different standard. And as well, I really see like he kind of goes out of his way like to try to hurt God, and it seems like they're like then he goes out of his way to go hurt them to hurt God. So they're kind of just innocent bystanders in all of this.
Do we know like what Eve's motivation was? Was it in any way similar to Satan? Did she? What was her main motivation? What do you guys think for? To eat the fruit.
Well, I think there was some vanity in it, because the snake was, flattering her, saying she was his goal to come seek her out because of her beauty.
Yeah, I think Satan was trying to instill the same lustful and sinful desires that he had in Eve.
Because he failed before.
Exactly.
Trying to do it.
I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Satan, the serpent, didn't die when he ate the fruit. Like, there were a lot of things that I think persuaded her, and that being one. And also how he like made it seem like if she doesn't like her, like they kept saying like you need like your eyes will be opened and you'll like have knowledge to all these things. And I feel like she being inferior to Adam, I think she wanted that knowledge to have some sort of power, and that like motivated her to do it.
To go back to the second part of your question, I think you said the angel was sentenced to eternal damnation. To be completely honest with you, I don't think humans are that far off from eternal damnation, because now we have the possibility of going to hell. We're not in a perfect paradise anymore. So when you look at it, we are not exactly eternally damnedized, but
Just like
But
a
you
different.
it's still, yeah, exactly. So it's still a possibility.
I was gonna say, I completely agree with you. Like, obviously the punishments are different, but you know, life on Earth and then the possibility of damnation isn't that far off. Because Earth itself, I mean, there's joy in it, and they experience joy there, but it's not a perfect world. There's that chance of damnation.
And similar to, I think there's similarities also between the two punishments because Satan seems to be thinking that there is the possibility, not that he would take it, but there is a possibility to repent. And at some point in his thinking, God would allow him back, similar to how humans have the ability to repent and be allowed back into salvation.
Does anybody else have anything important to say? We ready to move on?
All right, some more.
Timekeeper, thank you.
So my OQ is the nature of man similar to that of a fallen angel, Satan, in that their nature is they obey reason before they obey God?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question that relates to the different punishments. I think that Satan's reason was superior to man, which is why I think he had a greater knowledge because he was in heaven, whereas Adam and Eve, they were in paradise, but they weren't actually in heaven. So I think that's one of the reasons why his guilt is greater than Adam and Eve's, because his intellect was superior. And in Genesis 3, verse 13, the Lord God said to the woman, "Why hast thou done this?" And she answered, "The serpent deceived me." So I think that's one of the differences between man's reason and the angels is man was capable of being deceived, whereas angels, they had a more perfect intellect where they understood the nature of God better. So
I think that's a really good point. And when I thought about it, there's no real mention of time or how long Adam and Eve were in paradise. But from everything I've read, it seems like they're relatively new. This is all new to them. They've just been created. And with that possibility that they could be deceived, it just seems like if it's going to happen, it would happen sooner rather than later when they're fresh to this new setting and they're suddenly approached by someone that they don't immediately suspect as being evil and out to harm them and harm God. So I think that really plays into it.
Yeah, so I think one thing that's important is I guess the role of evil and the knowledge of evil in all this, because pretty much from the start, Satan is fighting for evil, fighting against good, but Adam and Eve don't quite have that knowledge of evil yet. And it's really, you don't really see them really acting selfish and lustful and evil until after they are tempted. So that's kind of like a difference they have there.
I don't think they really grasp the magnitude of
They don't really understand that.
what's going to happen or what could happen.
Yeah, I think it's kind of backwards because they seem to try to justify everything that they do or like why they should do it rather than being like they justify it and then they're saying like, oh, but we didn't obey God, rather than saying like God told us not to do this and then justify off of why God told them not to. They just try to justify like why they should do it rather than just be like, why wouldn't God want us to?
And it's interesting to think because I in my daily life think to err is human. That's been an age-old saying that I've thought of. I wonder if that sort of human error applies to them while they're still in perfect paradise, or if they would be infallible and unable to err in any way prior to eating fruit.
Right, I think that's relates to what I was saying is how our reason definitely, at least in traditional Christianity, it is more weakened now than it was before the fall. But at the same time, even before the fall, I don't think it was completely perfect, as superior, as good as the angels, or else Eve wouldn't have been able to be deceived. I think.
Yeah, I'd be deceived so easily because it just seems like it didn't take much for her to be deceived by the snake. And if she had more knowledge of even what evil was on a core sense. And too, something that I feel like I don't think we've ever touched upon, but Adam and Eve have never interacted with anyone else besides God, and just on that basic level, the snake is probably the first thing that they've talked to, and they've never met any other humans, and God too.
They did speak to one other angel, but assuming that that angel had the same form as God, they've never spoken to anything other than a human person.
Each other.
Each other,
Exactly.
yeah. So talking to a snake
Yeah, it's like they're told to not give into temptation, but they don't know what temptation looks like.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And like you guys said, it's all new to them. They were just created. They're curious to try something. So I feel like they were easily tempted because of this. Like they maybe internally they actually did want to try it, and it like wasn't mentioned, but maybe it was like an internal curiosity.
I mean, it's kind of like going up to a kid and saying, "Do you want some candy?" And as a 4-year-old, what 4-year-old's going to say? No, I don't want any candy.
Exactly.
It's like their fault was like the limitation of their knowledge.
Yeah, and they may not have even like cared, but because like the serpent like so many times it's just like, like just try it, try it. Like they're like, okay.
I do think like, I mean, it seems that Eve has a pretty good idea of what death is, even though it seemed like we didn't think that before, but it seems, at least in book 9, that she has a good concept of like the consequences of death. But at the same time, all the great things that they can gain from eating the fruit kind of seem to outweigh that. The ability to be like God is so tempting.
And to go off of exactly that, there's a line in book 9 at around 708, where Satan says he is now like a human because of eating the fruit, so he upgraded from an animal to a human. Similarly, man could upgrade or become like God.
Maybe
the next step up.
Yeah.
Maybe that's one of the reasons why one of our punishments is that our reason is less. It's not as good as it was before the fall, is because we were trying to be like God, or Adam and Eve were trying to be like God, so it was like a proportionate punishment. Well, you want to be like God, so we're going to make it even less than you are now.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm going to go ahead with my OQ, which, very politely here, is we know that Adam and Eve had sex before the fall, right after they were married, and then once again after Adam and Eve ate the fruit. So I'll point you to page 106 around line 736.
Of which book?
I'm sorry, book 4, which is the location where they just had sex the first time, and then on page 235 around line 1034. And so, like I said, my question is, what's the difference between them, the first time and the second time? I'll start off by saying that, it's clear lust and I think passion might be a difference, where in the first time it was sort of, this is right after you've been married and it seems completely normal, and then in the second time it's more of something driven by human passion and things that we see today, immediate lust. So, do you have any thoughts?
I guess for one thing, it kind of seems like kind of we talked about before, like the selfish versus selflessness. In the first time they have sex, I guess one line that kind of points out to me is they mentioned wedded love, and to me that's like a very like selfless love, self-giving, and then afterwards, the sex they have after the fruit is very. That's after they become more selfish, and it's more what they're trying to get out of it from each other rather than give to each other.
Yeah, here it says of amorous intent, and then I'll read the exact part. There they fill their love and love's disport, took largely of their mutual guilt the seal, the solace of their sin till dewy sleep. And that sounds more less about marriage and more about pleasure and enjoyment.
Yeah, another possible difference in line 732. But thou hast promised from us to a race to fill the earth, who shall with us extol thy goodness infinite. So it looks like before the fall, like you said, there is more having to do with marriage, like the traditional purposes of marriage, to have children and to give glory to God, whereas after the fall it seemed more solely just pleasure and lust.
And also just like the words that are used, like in book 4, it uses happy, mutual love, like it just seems like adored. And then you see in book 9, it's like in lust they burn, contagious fire, like it's just amorous play, like, it's not like happy, married, like just married, it's more like very lustful and
Definitely. And it does going off what Mr. Henderson said, like it does mention like procreation in book 4, and it says our maker bids increase, who bids abstain, but our destroyer foe to God and man. and it says like a lot of it's almost like really beautiful because they're talking about purity and like the place and like how it's this innocent, beautiful love, and it's like intended, to have human offspring and to live in paradise for, all eternity, and then afterwards it's just all craziness.
Another part on page 235 about line 1030. I saw thee first and wedded thee, adorned with all perfections. So inflame my sense with ardor to enjoy thee, fairer now than ever, bounty of this virtuous tree. To me, that line right before it talks about them having sex, it sounds as if Adam sees Eve as almost hotter now, or that she thinks, or he thinks that she's much more desirable to have sex just because they've eaten from the tree.
I will say when Eve is discerning whether or not to tell Adam, when she's reasoning not to tell Adam, she says that having eaten the fruit will hopefully make her more attractive to Adam. Whether or not that's simply her being more powerful than him, or it's something about the fruit that will actually make her more attractive.
Yeah. Well, it worked, I think.
I thought it was. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, like Adam's thing was like to protect her. So, like now that she like went off and like did like the forbidden, and it's kind of maybe it's like his way of like trying to get her back under his like wing of protection. Like kind of the way he sees her now is like, oh, I need to protect you more. So it's like this whole new view of her rather than before.
That's interesting. I didn't think about like. You mean like using sex to
Protect, like a way to like have like a hold over her almost.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so true.
I didn't think about that. Yeah.
It's kind of like society today.
Yeah.
Almost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess one obvious difference that I don't think we mentioned yet is how before the fall they didn't feel guilty afterwards, but after the fall they felt that they had lost their innocence and everything.
It's also interesting how they didn't feel naked really until after they had sex.
Yeah.
You ready?
Yeah, that's kind of where my question goes along, more or less. So, I was wondering, like, what you guys thought about how Adam and Eve felt, like, how they lost their innocence was darkened, they felt guilty, they felt shame, all after, like, the day after they ate the fruit, like, after they have sex, rather than right after they ate the fruit. So, I was wondering if you guys thought anything of that there's the middle. They had sex, they went to sleep, and then they started feeling that way rather than the day it happened.
Well, not to be grotesque, but line 1045, oppress them, wearied with their amorous play. I think at its most basic level, I think they had such passionate sex that they just fell asleep immediately, and they didn't really, kind of like when you get in like in a state where you don't even realize like what's going on, and then you just fall right asleep, and then it's not till the next day they wake up and think that they immediately regret their actions.
Yeah, to go along with that, I mean, they just seem so incensed by it, like immediately afterward, like they're not thinking of anything else. So the shame might be there, but it's just overwhelmed by passion.
It could just be like getting caught up in the moment. I mean, even
Yeah.
Eve, Eve has this entire time where she's still deciding whether or not to tell Adam. That she tells Adam, and then he gets tempted, eats the fruit, then they have sex. So for her specifically, there's even more time than for Adam till it's happened. So I think it's just like there's some enthralled in all of this.
I think part of it also is before they ate the fruit, or after Eve ate the fruit, but before Adam, they were engaging in some self-deception. I think, like it says in 938, Adam speaking, "Nor can I think that God, creator wise, though threatening will in earnest so destroy us as prime creatures." Now this is before Adam ate, but he was already starting to deceive himself into thinking that nothing bad was going to happen after they ate the fruit.
I think it's also them trying to avoid the guilt. Like, they have this high and they just kind of want to keep it going. And then it isn't until, like, after they wake up, after they've just... Then they, like, actually have the time to, like, think about what they did. So I think it could have also just been, like, avoiding that.
And not to forget, they were threatened with death if they ate it, and they both ate it. They're still alive, so that might somehow influence whether
It was like a celebration.
Yeah.
Yeah, or they could even be like, well, we're gonna die, so like, let's just do this now. Like, same thing. Like,
You have 24 hours to live.
yeah. I mean, doesn't necessarily say that, but it could be a different way to look.
Line 1053. Soon found their eyes how opened and their minds how darkened. Innocence, that as a veil has shadowed them from knowing ill, was gone. Just confidence, native righteousness, and honor from about them. Naked left to guilty shame he covered. Do you think that's regret that they're experiencing? Is it because I'm trying to figure out if it's just shame and just the awareness that they're naked and now after they've eaten the fruit, or do you think that's Adam and Eve somewhat expressing regret for what they did?
I'd say it's definitely expressing regret on the way they say, saying their minds were open now, or their eyes had opened, but their minds were darkened. That wording just makes it sound like they know something's wrong, they know something's different, and I think that's regret.
Yeah, I think it was definitely regret. Line 1071, Adam says both good and evil, good lost and evil got. So it seemed like he was aware that they had lost good and gained evil. So I think it was regret.
Yeah, I think it's just the realization of the evil too, which ties into the regret.
Yeah, and that's when it comes also that they like blame each other for it. So I feel like, I think it's regret.
Yeah, and I think like it also like it says confounded long they sat and stricken mute. Like they didn't talk for a while, and like I think they're just like sitting there in their guilt and their shame. But like they now that they're given this knowledge, like they're sitting there thinking about what they've done, and they know.
Okay. If anybody has anything else to say, or we're good to move on to our next OQ.
Okay. For the last OQ, I was just going to generally ask why Milton focused, or in the excerpts that we've read, why Milton talks so much through Satan's voice, and why do we get a better sense of Satan than we do of than Adam and Eve, specifically in like book 9, but then also in the beginning books. So I believe it's in book 1 where he wakes up and we first start to see getting insight into Satan's head.
I think maybe because we don't really get insight to Satan in the Bible much. No one really has like the backstory or
Like his side of the story.
yeah, his side. So I think he's like a complicated character to understand. So it might just be a way for us to relate to Satan, because I think in a way, like how I said, I thought that Satan and Adam and Eve were all kind of similar in their faults. So I think it's kind of a way to connect to him too.
And it could also be because, after the fall, we have the sin. That's something that like now humans deal with every day. That's something that we're more easily relatable to Satan than to God.
Yeah, I think the entire book itself on it, of course, like it illuminates like so many different obviously like Satan, Adam, Eve, all of them, like it illuminates so much about them. But yeah, particularly Satan, there's so much that we learned, and I think Milton writes in. I think should be part of is that, especially in Genesis, like Satan's such a mystery. Like Adam and Eve, we kind of have a general idea of like who they are, even though they don't really speak to each other very much. But Satan especially is such a mystery; we don't really know anything about him. So it's helpful to like illuminate so much more and give him so much more of a personality.
Yeah, just to support what Ms. Chefalas and Mr. VanGessel have said about it possibly being because there are similarities between the sin of Satan and the sin of Adam and Eve. I think Satan was motivated by wanting to be equal to God, and Adam and Eve, they were motivated to sin because they wanted to be like God. And also, Milton has Satan saying that it's better to reign in hell than to be subject to God in heaven. And Eve later referenced in book 9, around line 815, she refers to God as our great forbidder, safe with all his spies. So Milton sees both Satan and Eve wanting to be free from what they consider the tyranny of God.
Going back to what Ms. Chefalas said, I think that was a really great understanding of why we hear from Satan, because in the Bible it's so cloudy and there's no real description or anything of his. And your question reminded me of book 3. I'm looking at page 62, right at the beginning, where Milton writes in the way Milton writes here, the eyes refer to Satan. So it's Satan speaking first-handed, and then it really, I mean, Milton has a large give and take on how much he can speak to the devil, because there's nothing written down in Genesis. So I think it's really interesting to see how he goes and does this speech about how he son of chaos and eternal night and escaped from the Stygian pool, and then find himself tempting Adam and Eve.
And we don't see a lot of, before the fall, we don't see a lot of passion in Adam and Eve, not even just sexually, but just in general, they don't have that passion for anything really. And then they do, of course, afterwards. And I think a big way to describe Satan, especially in like book 3 when he is thinking about what he's lost, the passion dims his face, as line 114 says. You know, Satan's a very passionate person for the wrong reasons, but I think that translates to Adam and Eve as well.
I also think what Milton mentions about Satan in the first couple books about how his malice and how he just wants to do evil, and good for him is doing evil, further illuminates the temptation later on, how Satan pretended to be a liberator for Eve and to fix the injustice of God's unjust command. So what Milton did by writing so much about Satan at the beginning about his malice, it illuminates it so that we don't later on consider Satan to be a good man who's freeing man. So we have a better sense of his true malice.
Yeah, and I think too, Milton builds Satan up and builds him up and builds him up and shows us like how evil he is and like how bad he is, and then after the fall, when they eat, we don't really hear from Satan, and he's kind of gone, and it kind of shows that the good of God in a sense, that good will always kind of overpower evil, no matter how much you work it up and how much there is. So it's interesting.
Well, I think this has been a great discussion. Mr. VanGessel, if you'd like to cut the video feed. Thank you for joining the Rising Seas, and we'll see you in class.
Just hope it all recorded. Yeah, all right.